The old house at the end of Willow Creek wasn't just made of wood and stone. It was built from decades of laughter, shared meals, and the quiet strength of a family that refused to break. For the Miller family, the Whispering Oaks estate was the heartbeat of their existence. The arrival. The story begins on a crisp autumn afternoon. David, the eldest son, pulled into the gravel driveway. He had spent the last 10 years in the city, chasing a career that gave him everything except peace. As he stepped out of the car, the scent of pine and wood smoke hit him. It was the smell of his childhood. His sister, Sarah, was already on the porch, swinging gently. She hadn't left their hometown. She had stayed to care for their aging parents, and though she never complained, the fatigue was visible in her eyes. When they hugged, it wasn't just a greeting. It was a reconnection of two souls who had been pulled apart by the gravity of adult life. The dinner table. Inside, the kitchen was a hive of activity. Their mother, Martha, moved with a slow but purposeful grace, stirring a pot of her famous beef stew. Their father, Robert, sat at the wooden table, his hands, once strong enough to build the very walls around them, now trembling slightly as he peeled potatoes. "You're late," Robert grumbled, but the tinkle in his eye betrayed his joy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long amber shadows across the floorboards, the four of them sat down to eat. This table was the family's sacred ground. It had seen scraped knees, teenage heartbreaks, job losses, and celebrations. The conflict of silence. For the first few minutes, there was only the sound of silverware against porcelain, but beneath the surface, there was tension. David felt the guilt of his absence. Sarah felt the weight of her responsibility. They were a family that loved deeply, but often spoke in silhouettes. "I'm thinking of selling the firm's branch in the city," David said suddenly, breaking the silence. Sarah paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "And go where?" "Home," David replied softly. "I realize that I've been building a life for a stranger. I want to be here. For Dad. For you." The room went still. Martha reached across the table and placed her hand over David's. Her skin was like parchment, but her grip was steady. "Love isn't measured by how many times you show up when things are easy, David. It's measured by where you choose to stand when things are hard." The hidden legacy. After dinner, Robert called David into the study. He pulled out a dusty, leather-bound ledger. It wasn't a book of accounts, but a book of memories. Robert had kept every significant moment of his children's lives: the day Sarah won the science fair, the day David fell out of the oak tree, the first time they saw snow. "I kept this because I knew one day the noise of the world would make you forget who you are," Robert said, his voice husky. "We don't leave things behind for people, David. We leave ourselves in them." Robert explained that the house was more than an inheritance. It was a promise. He told David about the winter of '98 when the heater broke and they all slept in the living room under a mountain of blankets, telling stories until dawn. He reminded him that family love isn't a grand gesture. It's a million small sacrifices that create a safety net for the soul. The storm. As if testing their newfound resolve, a storm rolled in that night. The wind howled through the oaks, and a branch crashed through the window of the attic. Rain began to pour in. In the chaos, the family didn't panic. They moved as a single unit. David grabbed the plywood, Sarah brought the tools, and Robert directed them with the precision of the engineer he once was. Martha stayed with the flashlights, keeping the path clear. They worked in the dark, drenched and shivering, but they were laughing. In that moment of crisis, the distance of the last 10 years vanished. They weren't a businessman, a caregiver, and 2 retirees. They were the Millers. The new dawn. As the next morning broke, the world was washed clean. The air was cool and the sky was a piercing blue. David and Sarah sat on the back porch, watching the sun rise over the fields. "I used to think this place was a cage," Sarah admitted, leaning her head on David's shoulder. "And I used to think the city was freedom. Funny how we both got it wrong." They realized that the love they shared was like the oak trees surrounding the house. The leaves might fall, and the branches might break in a storm, but the roots were deep, tangled, and unbreakable. The resolution. A few months later, the house had been repaired, but more importantly, the relationships within it had been restored. David had moved back, opening a small consulting in town. He spent his afternoons helping Robert in the garden and his evenings taking the weight off Sarah's shoulders. They learned that family love requires maintenance, much like an old house. You have to tighten the screws of communication, sweep away the dust of resentment, and keep the fire of presence burning in the hearth. The final thought. As the camera of the mind fades out on the whispering oaks, we see the family gathered on the porch for a photograph. They aren't posing perfectly, they are leaning into each other, messy and real. Because in the end, we don't remember the money we made or the titles we held. We remember the hands we held. We remember the voices that called us home. We remember that no matter how far we wander, there is a place where we are always known, always forgiven, and always loved.